Okay, we're ready.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to, with the agenda item 1, call to order. I now call to order the December 13th, 2022 meeting of the Nevada Sentencing Commission. And it's good to see all of you, and also welcome all of those who are viewing the meeting on the Department of Sentencing's Policies YouTube channel. I will now ask Director Gonzalez to take the roll.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brady. Mr. Arascata? Chief Bays?
Here.
Dr. Bradley? Director Cafarata? Chairman DeRico?
Here.
Judge Freeman?
Here.
Director Gitter?
Present.
Mr. Hazibullah? DA Hicks? Mr. Hoffman?
Here.
Judge Jones? Dr. Lanterman?
Present.
Mr. McCormick?
Present.
Ms. Mull?
Here.
Ms. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Ponder?
Here.
Senator Canizaro? Senator Gokatia? Assemblyman Ortlicker?
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts? Vice Chair Brady?
Present.
Chair Stiglich? Vice Chair Brady, we have a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now for agenda item 2, public comment. I will now open the public comment. This is the first period of public comment. There are 2 periods of public comment, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end. Members of the public have 2 options for submitting public comment. First, members of the public may do so in writing by email to the Department of Sentencing Policy at sentencingpolicy@ndsp.nv.gov. Public comment received in writing will be provided to the Commission and be included by reference in the minutes of the meeting. Members of the public who wish to testify may do so by telephone. Due to the time constraints, public comment will be limited to 2 minutes. Any member of the public that exceeds the 2-minute limit may submit your comments in writing to the Department of Sentencing Policy, any comments that you are unable to complete on the phone. At this time, I will ask staff to manage and direct those who wish to testify by telephone. Mr. Sepulveda?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 or raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name. Chair, we don't have any callers right now.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 3, we're going to skip this agenda item. We will review and approve the minutes from the November 4th, 2022 meeting at our next meeting. So closing out agenda item number 3 and moving on to agenda item number 4, report from the director. I will now, a report from our director at the Department of Sentencing Policy. At each meeting, the director provides us an update on the recent activities of the department and other matters related to the commission. It looks like we are also going to get an update on justice courts. I now turn the time over to Director Gonzalez to present her report.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I will get my presentation ready. Not the right one. All right, I apologize. All right, it looks like I've got mine backwards because it looks like I was sharing my notes, right? Did you see the slides? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right, I am going to just go ahead and read my remarks, and you have the materials included with your what you received. So if you don't mind referring to those, I'll have you refer to my slides on there. On the second slide, first I wanted to provide you some updates about the commission. We currently have 2 vacancies. The Chief Natasha Koch of Nevada Division of Parole and Probation is retired. And we wanted to thank her for her service. And then also Chuck Calloway from Las Vegas Metro has retired. So that has created 2 vacancies on our commission. Those positions right now are being represented by a designated person, Beth Schmidt from Las Vegas Metro and Major Aaron Evans from the Division of Parole and Probation. They are working on their official appointments. Once we have, we're going to be working with the appointing authorities to get their appointments in place. And so we wanted to thank them for also being here today, and they will be representing their entities. They just won't be able to vote. As we discussed last time, we are going to shift into having more frequent meetings, but they will be shorter. The next meeting will be in February, a few weeks after session begins. The meetings are listed in the agenda, and as mentioned, we will keep the length of the meetings to no more than 3 hours, but we'll shoot to 2 to 2.5 hours for each meeting. During session, the meetings will be each month, with the last meeting of the 21-23 meeting cycle in June. We plan on that meeting in June being a quick 90 minutes to wrap up the meeting cycle. Related to that, appointments for the 2021-2023 meeting cycle end on July 31st. In June, we will start reaching out to the appointing authorities to solicit appointments. And as you all know, you can all be reappointed. The first meeting of the next meeting cycle will be in August. On the next slide, I will provide the first part of the update about Justice Counts. As you know, the Joint Interim Standing Committee issued a letter of support for Justice Counts, and that letter was sent out to various criminal justice stakeholders, including our commission. As a reminder, the 7 criminal justice sectors that we will collect data from are listed here. In order to participate in Justice Counts, an agency will submit an opt-in form, and then we will schedule an orientation to get the agency started on how they will submit their data. The orientations include me and my staff and members of the Justice Counts team. On the next slide, here is a list of those who are participating by criminal justice sector. In the defense sector, the Washoe Public Defender has opted in, and we have their orientation scheduled for January. Also, it looks like the Department of Indigent Defense Services will be opting in and providing the data that they collect. Under law enforcement, the Washoe County Sheriff submitted an opt-in form, which also included opting into the jail sector, and we are still trying to coordinate an orientation date. Under law enforcement, I also wanted to note that we are looking into how we can use existing NIBRS data to submit several of the metrics requested by Justice Counts on behalf of law enforcement agencies. When we held our informational summit a few months ago, the question was raised regarding how we could use data that already exists, that is already used for submitting for NIBRS. We met with a law enforcement agency who showed us how the submission of this data works. And then we met with the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division who showed us the data that is available. We are going to keep reviewing the data and then work with Justice Counts on how best to take the data from NIBRS and upload it to Justice Counts. But we think this will be a viable option for collecting and submitting the data, which means we don't need as many metrics from each law enforcement agency who opts in. As you can see, the Nevada Department of Corrections has opted in, and we've already completed their orientation. We are working to schedule our next meeting with them in January to take the next steps. This is the same for the Nevada Division of Parole and Probation. They opted in and we completed their orientation, and the next step of their onboarding will also take place in January. We really want to thank those of you, our partners who have opted in and those who we've already met with. I also wanted to mention, we got an update from the Justice Counts team about the Tier 2 metrics. As we've discussed, the Tier 1 metrics are the current metrics that we're collecting, and Tier 2 will be the next level of metrics that can be collected. The Justice Counts team has nearly worked on finalizing those, and the next stage for those will be soliciting public comment through their mechanism for gathering feedback. When we have those dates and set up, we will send that out to the commission so that you can participate in the public comment aspect of responding to those Tier 2 metrics and provide your feedback, which they're really looking forward to, as it helps them refine and figure out what's the best way to set up those metrics for collecting data. Finally, on the next slide, I want to share some ideas we have about how the commission could proceed with the upcoming session. This will be our second session since we were established in 2019, and I have been exploring recommendations for how this commission could track and participate in the legislative process. I know there are a lot of positions and ideas shared during bill hearings, Many, if not most of the members of our commission are very active during session. But as a public body, it might make sense to bring everyone together to review proposed legislation. Additionally, our staff can present data analysis we put together in response to some of that legislation. And of course, we can get timely feedback from this commission on what you would like us to track and research. This would be the plan for those meetings during session. Review legislation, data, and hear more presentations towards the reentry and recidivism project that we proposed last meeting. And then we would invite other ideas or focus areas that the commission would like us to work on during session. The last thing I will point out is that the recommendations developed and approved by this commission to be submitted as a BDR are now a bill. This is Assembly Bill number 32. The recommendations were those related to technical violations and the various changes recommended for the position of the executive director and the membership. We are already brainstorming any amendments that may be appropriate for this bill. If the commission has any ideas for amendments, we will be able to develop those during our meetings that take place during session. This concludes my report, and I'm ready for any questions or comments related regarding these items. Vice Chair Brady.
Thank you for that report, Director Gonzalez. Are there any questions for the director or her staff?
Sorry, it's Julia Murray. It's not allowing me to raise my hand.
Okay. Yes, Chief Deputy Public Defender Julia Murray.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. As always, it's great to hear an update and hear everything in a condensed fashion. It certainly makes it clear that a lot has been going on and it keeps it all good and fresh in our minds. So thank you for putting this together. I did have a somewhat of a question, somewhat of a concern regarding Assembly Bill number 32. When we met on May 9th, it was a very lengthy, very contentious meeting of this commission. And at that meeting, there were a number of votes held given the various recommendations, and some passed and some failed, and some were amended so far that I think some of us got lost in the mix of it all. I saw Assembly Bill 32 for the first time last Thursday. Someone sent it to me asking whether or not I had seen it. I reviewed it and I was caught pretty off guard upon reviewing it because my recollection of how things went at the May 9th meeting regarding the temporary revocations and the quote unquote abilities to dip was very different than what I saw reflected in AB 32. I did go back and review the minutes, and to not belabor the point, just to sort of highlight where the concern is focused so that we can maybe come with a solution. On page 43 of the May 9th minutes, there was an original motion made by Commissioner Hicks to pass the language as proposed in the recommendations regarding temporary revocations. That motion failed. There were then subsequent motions that take place beginning on page 44 of the minutes and exceeding almost through about page 47. And what ultimately happens is that we passed a motion to adopt conceptual language, formulate a small working group to develop the language to be reflected from our discussion, and to also refer the minutes and the current proposals to the LCB so that they could come up with language that would realize the intent of the discussions we were having on the night. So when I reviewed AB 32 as it currently sits, I was very surprised to see that the language regarding temporary revocations was identical to that which was proposed at the May 9th meeting, which failed when it went to a vote. So I guess my first question would be, did any of those steps and recommendations that did in fact pass take place? Were the minutes sent to the LCB to continue to develop the language? Was a small working group ever formed? And if so, how did we come out with the exact same thing that failed? That's now being put forward as the endorsement of all of us. And then I guess after receiving those answers, I potentially would, and I would like you to weigh in on the feasibility of this request. I would potentially like to make a motion to refer those May 9th minutes specifically on this topic back to the LCB with a second request that our thoughts and our discussion be reincorporated to be reflected in the language, because the language that's here failed. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. There were a couple other minor issues, but that was the primary concern that I had.
Okay, thank you so much. And we can come back to the other, your other questions too. I think it'd be worth exploring and discussing. So I just want to make sure I got all of your questions so that I address them.
Sorry.
No. And I was trying to write, no, it's great. I really appreciate it. So I just want to make sure. So you just want to know about the first part, your first question about the steps. I wrote down steps recommended to take place. So could you just clarify that question?
What had passed at the May 9th meeting was that we had passed the idea of either formulating a small working group to develop the language that would reflect the discussion that had taken place, or to send, and I think what ultimately passes is this latter. It was to send the minutes and the current recommendation that had been formulated to the LCB to allow them to draft language that would reflect the discussion that had taken place. I believe that it was an amendment to a motion made by Commissioner Arascata, and I believe it came from Commissioner Caffaretta. And ultimately, that is my recollection and my belief, having reviewed the minutes of what ultimately passed.
Okay, perfect. So that's good. I had the pieces about the working group when it was sent to LCB. So then remind me if I missed any of the pieces. So perfect. So I really appreciate this, your questions, and I think it shows like how a little bit messy the process can be for trying to get a recommendation and a BDR put together. So I will say, first of all, to address the working group piece, is our commission does not have statutory authority to form a working group or any sort of subcommittees. I'm working on looking for an opportunity to get an amendment for us to do that, because it's come up before in previous meetings. And I'd have to look at those minutes again to see if I did address that issue at the meeting. I might have neglected to. So yeah, and so that would be why that wasn't actually part of the motion the way I recollected, because you're right, that motion got very, it got messy about trying to keep track of what was approved. And so because I knew we didn't have that statutory authority, I didn't think of it as part of the motion. And so the way that I thought of the motion overall was, and I remember, you're right, I remember Holly Wellborn and a couple other people bringing up the idea of like not worrying about the language, but worrying about the concept, right, of proposing that. So so you're right, conceptually, there were those bullet points that did include a jail incarceration and electronic monitoring. So that was in the conceptual amendment. And then there was an idea for the proposed language. So so what was sent over to LCB, because at the time the BDR was due, we did not have the minutes. So I sent the PowerPoint presentation over with a separate document that identified, here's the conceptual amendment. And what's tricky about what you're bringing up about there wasn't a consensus on all those other issues that were addressed. And so because the commission approved a conceptual amendment, all LCB had were those bullet points. And so I can see why that language was then used, because they went conceptually and then looked at the PowerPoint. And I did reference the meeting, and I meant that as like a form of the minutes, almost like video minutes to review what was discussed. But I would say I think we could look at the minutes together. I think it's a good idea to review, because the problem is I remember all of those different issues that were brought up. It's just none of them were in the consensus of what the commission approved. And so conceptually, it would be tricky about how to get some of those other pieces in. So I just want to make sure I addressed your question about what was submitted to LCB and what we have now. Does that answer that part of your question?
It does, but it created a follow-up. I apologize.
No, please. That's why we're here.
I mean, I guess the crux of my concern is that the language that's now being put out as endorsed by the Sentencing Commission point blank failed at a vote. So that rings as a problem to me to have it going forward in that fashion. I think that we were all in agreement that we thought something more needed to be considered and drafted at that point, which is why the idea of sending it on to the LCB with additional information being the minutes so that they could go through that argument and kind of parse out what the intent was an agreeable solution to everybody. So I guess my follow-up becomes, one, are we as commissioners privy to the document that was sent so that we can see if we feel it properly reflected the intent that we were discussing sending forward. And then as a separate question, as I think many of us did believe that the minutes were being sent forward and that they would be reviewed, is there still time and an opportunity to do that?
So to the first part of your question, I'd have to look at that because I think that's a great question about the confidentiality between the agency. I see us all as being one. And so I don't see a problem with that, but I would want to make sure that because the commission is a public body, we have to be careful about what the commission reviews not in a public meeting versus what was confidentially sent to LCB. I guess I would hope that there's a trust and a confidence in what I'm telling you, what we submitted, and that maybe we can work through like that and see what could have been done differently. I will say what's really tricky here. And I'll say first, what's tricky here is the concept. The concept was the bullet points, right? A conceptual amendment was the motion. And I think we could have explored more what exactly is that in that conceptual amendment, or sorry, conceptual proposal, right? Conceptual idea for a BDR, because the bullet points is what would be submitted. And so that's what I would say just gets tricky. And I remember part of that being the discussion, that's the dilemma when we start looking at language and we start trying to figure out the language versus just the idea. So I will say that's tricky when it comes to the concept versus what someone proposes language, and whether or not LCB looked at the concept and thought the language might adopt that. So again, I'm going to get to the other issues that were discussed were not approved by a majority of the commission. Was my take. So I would like, so first of all, I would like to hear maybe what you would like addressed, because now we could talk as a commission and now really explore those deeper once we see the language. Because I think that was the problem at the commission, right? Was we didn't have the language, we couldn't parse it out. Now that we have language, we see what it looks like, we have all the pieces. So now this is the opportunity for us to parse it out. So the next step would be, I would recommend, and for this commission, would be now let's hash this out. Now that we have this here, what are the issues? And then does the commission as a majority approve? Because then what we would do is submit an amendment. And then what I would do is I would be able to take that amendment to the bill, to the hearing, and say the commission by a majority approved these changes. Because the conceptually, the bill does capture those bullet points. That's why I would like to hear more what you would like to see, because it does apply the jail incarcerations, right, as the flash incarcerations, and it does have the electronic monitoring. The recommendation was let LCB figure out how to put that in. And this is how, and I would say like, it doesn't, I guess I'll have to, I guess it kind of looks like what was proposed, but I guess it looked very different. I guess there were some parts I thought looked a little different, but I could see how it didn't incorporate some of the things you were talking about. So I know I'm kind of talking for a minute. So
I appreciate it.
Okay, so then would you share, so go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, at least on the portion regarding the temporary revocations, it's word for word what was failed in the motion, which is what raised my most like obvious concern on the front end. I mean, it is word for word with no changes, not even a punctuation change. So I guess that's, kind of the real heart of where my concerns come from. I guess I'll be done after this, I promise, guys. My only remaining question would be, when and how would these discussions regarding an amendment take place? Because we are very much on the clock at this stage.
Yeah. I guess then if this is what we need to do, I'm happy to, we could talk about some of it now. That's why I'm saying if there's something, if you would like to discuss it now, we could start exploring it. Then I could start understanding what the issues are, and then we can figure that out. I agree, because I think this bill will be one of the earlier hearings. So I guess I just want to understand too, because I hear you on the language does look similar. It's also consistent with the conceptual, because to me, that was the dilemma with that discussion, right? Was getting bogged down in the language. And I'd have to look at, again, what the issues were with the language versus the conceptual. And so I guess if your issue, because the LCB received the slide presentation as reference, and the document submitted to LCB was said, use the slide presentation as reference, but the submission, the document, there was a memo that I put out that says, here's the concept, do this, 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 and this. Use the slides as a reference, right? And the meeting as a reference. But I guess it sounds like your concern is not, I guess I want to get to the substance versus the motion, because I hear that you're concerned about the motion that was denied or that didn't pass or that failed, but it's still consistent with the conceptual. And that's where that motion's tricky, right? The fact that the motion that approved the BDR was like, we approve the concept but not this language. I have no influence over LCB. And so I guess I would like to get at is there a concern with the substance of what's there as well? Like both?
Yes, I mean, I do have concerns regarding the substance of how the temporary revocations were presented. I think that the language suggests that you should be doing dips or these flash incarcerations. And I think that it suggests that they come in a certain format, which we talked about at length at the May 9th meeting. The fact that as it was currently written, it was almost a push in a particular direction. I am not prepared today because I didn't actually believe it was appropriate for today to go through with, sort of match to match. This is kind of where I think what was submitted is not in full compliance with what was happening at that May 9th meeting. So I don't want to say something and then later have a moment to dig a little deeper and be like, well, I shouldn't have put it out there that way because it's not really what I meant. But, as I said, I only saw this for the first time on Thursday evening when somebody else reached out to me about it. So a member of the public, but,
so I just want to be sure, like, so you are thinking that something was out of compliance?
I am in regards to the temporary revocations, yes. And I know that I have reached out to a couple other members of the commission, and I do know that there are others that share that view, potentially not as strongly as I do, but there are others that share that view on the revocations aspect.
I have a question, Christine Jones-Brady, for the record. So we're having a February meeting. Do you, this is a question maybe for commission members to comment on, do we think we want to have a separate meeting, like to have this BDR distributed to all of the commissioners for their review and then have a meeting to talk about that BDR, just a meeting on that? Because sounds like that might take a while. Is that something, does anyone have a comment on whether or not that would be something they'd want to do? And before we move on, Jim Hoffman, do you have a comment on this issue or a new issue?
It's on this issue. I just wanted to echo the concerns that Ms. Murray is raising. Also, Ms. Jones-Brady, I think that's a good suggestion. I think this is definitely deserving of more discussion, maybe when we've all had more of a chance to go through it. That's how I feel. Thank you.
Kimberly Mull, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am, really more of a comment. So I understand how LCB is inundated right now with having to write, bills. That's just what they're doing. And so a lot of times they copy paste things and make things as quickly as they can. And there's nothing against them, but that's just how it is. But did we get, normally with the BDR, you put in the BDR, LCB will then draft the bill and then seek input before they actually put it down as, okay, now this is AB 32 and put it on the record so it's public, and now we have to amend things. Did we get a chance to review that BDR language before it became public? Because it seems like that's maybe some of the issue is, okay, there was a disconnect somehow somewhere of the language that we okayed or didn't okay got put into this. But there's normally another step in here where with LCB, we have a chance to review it before it becomes public and before it goes on the record of, hey, this is something we've done or started out with. So did we get a chance to review that bill before, or review the BDR language before it was put actually into the system as a bill? Would be my first question. The second question, or second's a comment of, we have to meet before February in order to do this, because being that this is AB 32 and it's a commission, a state appointed commission bill, it's probably going to be one of the first things heard. So, because it's going to be viewed as something kind of easy peasy. So we're, before the first reading gets out there, like, we're going to need to have some ducks in the row, or have a talk with the chair of that committee and be like, hey, we need you to, hold off on reviewing this. So we have to have one of two of those things happen. That's it.
I think Assemblyman Ornflicker, did you have a comment on this?
Yeah, so my view would be, if this were my bill, I would not send it back to LCP. I would develop an amendment to bring to committee when it's being heard, a substitute. And so I would recommend that Julie and others who have concerns to create a red line version of the bill, and that we meet in January before session to hopefully approve a red line version that we can then, when this is scheduled, have, we would go say to the committee, here's our substitute conceptual amendment, our red line version. And I think Kimberly's right. It's worth checking with the new chair of Assembly Judiciary to see if that makes sense with her. But I think that would seem to be the simple, most efficient way to update this.
Director Gonzalez, are those suggestions feasible and allowable under the rules for this commission?
Yeah, we cannot send the bill back. We're at the point we can't send it back. The only way to change it would be through an amendment. And so it would require a meeting. I agree that the hearing would happen very quickly. And so we would need to meet. It's possible we might have to meet more than once in January I think, to explore some of these issues.
So then, in terms of point of order, should we take a motion on whether we want to meet in January on just this BDR? Would that be appropriate?
Do we have a quorum now?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe we do, unless someone got off.
I don't know if the commission wants to. Yes, if that's what the commission wishes.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we meet sometime in January on a date to be specified to discuss this BDR.
I would second that motion. And I would make a friendly amendment that the motion be distributed to the members of the commission prior to, because I don't believe that everyone has seen it.
I'm sorry, could you clarify the motion that was just passed, proposed here?
I thought you meant me clarify. I apologize. I was asking that prior to whatever meeting gets scheduled, if this passes, if we amend and add to the motion that this be distributed formally to all the members of the commission, so that we don't run into an issue where anyone says that they weren't properly having access to the document beforehand.
I'm sorry, the bill?
So the motion would be to have a meeting in January to discuss, what is it, AB 32? To discuss AB 32, and that AB 32 be distributed to the commission prior to that January meeting. Is that any discussion on the motion? All right, doesn't sound like there's any discussion on the motion. Chair, would you take a,
You're the chair, vice chair.
okay, so then if we could take a vote on this motion, and then you want me to just read down the list?
Chair,
Or
could
do
I
you-
just ask a quick question?
Yes.
Sorry, to Michelle Days for the record. So at that meeting that we're proposing, is that the intent then to try and come to some sort of a consensus to we can make amendments or changes to what's been submitted? And just I guess a thought on that is correct. Story is right. We did not agree as a commission on a lot of the points. So I don't know if that would be likely to happen. Certainly welcome the discussion, but I was just, I guess, kind of a little bit confused of what we're trying to either accomplish, because conceptually I have not seen the documents there, but I understand what Director Gonzalez has explained, that it's just really just conceptual. And then of course, what was also mentioned about bills change, amendments take place. They don't, typically don't end up at the end exactly how they start. So that was just my question. What are we trying to accomplish? And is it even that likely?
Assemblyman Orntlicker?
Yeah, I
don't know if
think it would be essential for us to come out of the January meeting having approved a red line version. And so I think it's important for people who have suggestions for change to prepare those in advance of the meeting so that we have a document that we can, a revised document to work from. If it's just a discussion of the current document, I'm afraid we won't have something we can forward on. So yes, I think it's critical to have a red line version or 2 or 3. I mean, I don't know the answer to whether how many reasonable alternatives to what we have, but I think we should clearly have at least one red line version to discuss and hope and to come out of that January meeting having approved a red line version that can go to committee.
But just to Chief Bay's comment about, are we likely to reach a consensus? And if we're not, my question to the director would be, this bill is something that would be, if not everyone on the commission agrees, would we just vote on it for a majority, or how does that work?
Sorry, so the question was, if people didn't agree?
Yeah, so to Chief Bay's point, that if the commission is not likely to agree, let's say on a red line version, then what?
Then I think there's a couple of directions we could go. So a comment, and I just want to make sure I'm not, I guess I'll have an admission here. I'm not the expert on the rules here. So we have a motion on the table. Is it okay for us to keep having this discussion? Does anybody know?
I think we're just, yeah, we're,
Okay.
people are discussing it, and then when
Okay.
people are done discussing it, then we can vote on it.
I just wanted to make sure. So I think that's an excellent point. And I think what Ms. Murray has brought up is one of the challenges of, and I think one of the amazing benefits of this commission is we have so many views. And what the value of this commission is, we get the views from all perspectives. And one of the questions is are there areas where the commission should be working towards a concession or being able to agree on issues and then trying to work towards, and sometimes we just might not be able to. And I think us going through this BDR process is a good example of maybe the challenges of that, right? How do we capture all these views and then put them into a BDR? And one of the things I don't want is to drive the conversation in this commission in a way that's not productive and not actually getting us to exploring the policies that I think this commission's built to do. And I think we're here to explore the issues. And maybe one of the things that our commission isn't built to do is to have a consensus for a bill. So, because I really appreciate being able to bring issues to the commission, we can explore them. And then I think maybe one of the things, and so I guess with the bill is if we weren't able to come to a concession and maybe, or a consensus, not concession, sorry, would be, no one has to concede anything. I think going through this process now, I wonder my possible, I guess a recommendation to consider would be, since it would be so difficult to get everyone to agree and to actually have confidence and faith in the process and in what we're trying to do, we could propose an amendment to take that piece out. Because if the commission agrees that we can agree, and this bill is supposed to represent an agreement of the commission, and the way it came out does not do that, that would be the way I think to address that. Because it's there now, and it does have the sentencing policy on it, and it does have an agreement of what looked like could be an agreement on the concept. But I think when we get into that could be one part of it. The other thing is this bill does represent, it was submitted on behalf of our agency, right? And so it's our agency bill. And so from there, we can have the different perspectives presented at the hearing. And maybe it's not a commission consensus, right? And then moving forward, maybe when it comes to our BDR, it'll be just a different type of approach. And so I know that's kind of all over the place, but maybe as a direction of where we could go so that we can make sure everybody's voices are heard and represented. And it makes sense that couldn't be in a bill. It has to be in maybe some other kind of document. And so my question would be back to the commission about what would you like us to do? Because what would you like to see and how would you like to move forward in a way that you're comfortable with having the commission represented? And so if you don't agree, then we need to propose an amendment or direct me to take action that will help represent the commission appropriately. So I hope that answers the question, maybe gives the commission some other ideas and direction about where we could go.
Any other, yes, thank you, Director Gonzalez. Are there any other comments as to whether or not this, a meeting to at least discuss the bill and possible red line amendments would be useful? Anyone else have a comment on that before we vote? Assemblyman Orntlicker? Or was that just a previous hand that was up?
Yeah, so David Orentlicker. Yeah, I'm ready to vote. I think we should have the meeting, but I guess I'm a little confused about the interaction between the department and this commission, and because this was, of course, the department's proposal. And so one way to interpret what I've heard is to say, unless we have a consensus to change the department's proposal, the department proposal will stand. Or we could take the view that if a majority of the commission wants to make a change, that should be sufficient to change. So I'm not clear on exactly how you view our role, how our role interacts with the department's proposal.
I thought that what I submitted was acting on behalf of the commission. And based on the approval of a conceptual amendment. And so because we're new, right? This is all new for all of us. Nothing, I would say there's not, and we were just talking about this morning on my staff. I don't know if there's another entity kind of like ours where there's a policy agency. An agency is supposed to collect data and work on policy. And then you have a public body that's supposed to explore the policy too. And as I just mentioned, one of the things that we've learned is we have amazing perspectives on this commission, but they're not necessarily built to arrive to a consensus on some really specific types of issues. I think the commission can on other issues, but maybe not certain issues. So I will say that based on what I understood the motion to be and the documents I had available, and I thought I explained everything to LCB, I will say I thought I was acting on behalf of the commission. And that was always my intent. I do think there are some things where the agency will do things independently. But ultimately, I serve at the pleasure of you. My position does. And
Okay.
so I am, like I said, I'll just say that. I thought that's what I'd put together. I thought that's what the bill represented. There were a lot of diverse views. I wasn't quite sure how to put into the BDR. And relying on you to help me incorporate what we should do next and what we're going to do in the future.
Okay.
And I think we've learned a lot about this process here, and that's what I look forward to doing. So I will say that, I guess in a nutshell, I serve at the pleasure of the commission. So.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask a follow-up question, then if the purpose of this bill is to reflect the will of the commission, then it'd be great if we can, we clearly don't have a consensus document now. That is absolutely clear. So I think, yes, let's try a revised version. It would be great if we could get to a consensus, but in the end, if we can't, seems to me then all we can do if we're going to put forth a bill is to follow the majority, because if we can't get a consensus, then we have no. So I think it seems as I said, at our next meeting, try to find consensus. If absent a consensus, take a majority vote and submit the majority view.
Any other comments, Ms. Murray?
Yes, thank you. One, I just want to say I certainly support the motion that's on the floor right now. I think even just ferreting out some of this discussion will be helpful to all of us moving forward, no matter what outcome it has on the particular BDR that's sitting on the table right now with the commission. And then also, I just wanted to clarify where I was coming from to begin this entire discussion. I don't think anything sinister happened here. I don't believe that anyone went and said, like, I want to go try to like assert some other agenda here whatsoever. I don't believe that at all. I actually think what happened here is it was such a contentious day. It was such a long day. The motions got very confusing that day. And moving forward, I would recommend that we as a body try to address these types of issues in smaller chunks and over a longer period of time so that we produce more reflective documents. But also I would just like it to be very clear that in no way in bringing this up did I want to suggest that the department intentionally went and did anything whatsoever. I think that the only way this could have possibly come out to be reflective of that meeting would have been to have the minutes, which I think is what many of us thought we were voting to provide to the LCB. So honestly, I don't know how anyone would have come up with a different outcome absent actually reading that whole discussion from that day. So I just wanted that out there in case anyone thought I was going any other direction with that. I'm absolutely not. And if at the end of the whole thing, the vote is that everybody's in support of this, then fine. It's just that that was not my recollection of that meeting, nor was it my rereading of the minutes from that day.
All right, thank you. If there's no further discussion on the motion, all those in favor, can you, I guess, raise your the little hand in the, if you can, the little icon. Director Gonzalez, can you all, looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Yeah,
9.
actually, Vice Chair, but I think it'd be better in this case, it looks like to do a roll call vote, so I can, I'll.
Okay, thank you. You can put down your hands and thank you, Director Gonzalez.
And just to now circle back to the motion. So the motion is to have a meeting in January to review AB 32, and that staff will be directed to distribute the bill well in advance of the meeting so that everyone has time to prepare and bring their issues to explore and discuss for a potential amendment. Does that sound like a good? Okay, excellent. Okay, Chief Bays,
No,
did you say no?
oh, no, yeah, no.
Let's see, Dr. Bradley,
Yes.
Director Cafarata. Chairman DeRico,
Yes.
Judge Freeman,
Abstain.
Director Gitter,
He's on mute. You are on mute, Director.
I apologize, yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
Yes.
Dr. Lanterman,
Yes.
Mr. McCormick,
Yes.
Ms. Mall,
Yes.
Ms. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Ponder,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ortlinker,
Yes.
Vice Chair Brady.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you. All right.
Oh, I apologize. I missed somebody about updating the, Judge Jones.
And I was going to abstain as well because I
Okay.
wasn't here when this conversation started, so I really have no idea what we're talking about.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. If there's no other comment on the director's report, any other comment on the director's report? And if not, I will close out that agenda item and open up, well, actually, any other comment first on the director's report? All right. Hearing no other comment on the director's report, for agenda item 5, report on criminal justice data, I will now open the agenda item. However, it looks like we are going to need to put this agenda item off to our February meeting, and I will turn time over to the director to explain.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brady. I have a different, I have an apology for the commission. I'm so sorry. Our management analyst has the flu, and as many of you know, this is definitely going around in some spaces. And so we worked very hard to see if he could power through, and it's just not the right thing. And so I apologize. We will move this item forward, as Vice Chair Brady said, to the February meeting. I want to thank everybody. We worked really hard to get those slides out to you in advance, so you had time to review them, and I'm sure you did. And I apologize that your work that won't get rewarded today. But we are going to just, what we'll do is we'll flesh out that data a little bit. So you saw that we did some comparison between just 2017 and 2021, 2022. So we're going to flesh that out so you have a true historical analysis. We'll have everything from 2017, 2018, 2019, each year, so we can look at all those trends. It'll be all the same data points. We also found some additional data metrics that we were really excited to share with you, and we were going to give them to you verbally. And so now we'll be able to prepare slides in time for those, so you really have time to pour over that information. And so again, we will have those to you, and we'll work to have them to you about a week in advance of the meeting so that you have time to review them. And again, I want to apologize that we weren't able to present that today, but we'll get our staff healthy and ready and ready to go for the February meeting and give you a full data presentation with all that information. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez. I will now open, I'll close out agenda number 5, and I will open agenda item 6, presentation and approval of the comprehensive report required pursuant to Nevada Revised Statute 176.0134. Every odd numbered year, we need to submit a comprehensive report. This report is due January 15th, 2023. Our staff have been working on the report and has a draft to present to us for our edits. Staff is also going to be looking for an approval of a version of the report to be submitted. I will now turn the time over to Director Gonzalez.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brady. In advance of this meeting, we provided the commission with our draft. Just as we talked about with the BDR in a bill, there are many approaches to take with a report like this. I'm trying to navigate how to represent the data, the different discussions, and the different views represented on the commission. The approach I took here was to include some information that had been presented at previous meetings, and some of the major some of the major data findings. One of the things I'm hoping for too, because one of the concerns that was raised at the last meeting was maybe you didn't have enough time to review some of the data discussion. And so I've included some of that here in the report if the commission feels that it's appropriate to include in a report like this. And so I will walk through some of the documents about and see what, and then we'll circle back to see what feedback you have. So there's an introduction section, as you can see on the first page, with a brief history. In some previous reports, I've elaborated on that. Sorry,
Excuse me, Director Gonzalez, excuse me.
Yes.
I might be able to share my screen. Do we want for me to try that? It might be a disaster, but I can try to share my screen because you were having problems sharing your screen, correct?
Just with the PowerPoint, I think I could, if that's helpful. I just wasn't sure it was big enough for everyone to see, but if that would be helpful, I'd be happy to share that. Let me just pull that up. All right, so it looks like we have that here. Okay, so here's the introduction section with the brief historical, just a brief history. In some reports, I provided more elaborate history of the department and the commission, but I figure over time we don't need to go into much detail. There's a summary of the statutory mandate for this report. It's quite comprehensive for the comprehensive report. And so because we're still in our early stages, even though we're 3 years in, we're not going to be able to meet all of these items, but I think it's a good reminder of where our goals are for what we want to someday include in the report. So I have that here as a reference. Specifically any recommendations from the Sentencing Commission, and then of course, like legislation, if there is any, and then the commission is statutorily required to measure outcomes from AB 236. The next 2 pages, I included the membership. So because the comprehensive report is submitted every other year and may sometimes overlap with meeting cycles, there may be different memberships based on the meeting cycle that were included. So here you can see the membership from the previous meeting cycle, and then we have the membership for the current meeting cycle, including those members who had served with us previously and have since resigned for various reasons. And then we have a note here about what the meeting cycle appointment, or what your appointment cycle is for the meeting. I have a small org chart for our staff, and then our mission statement that we recently revised and updated. And then there's a summary on page 4 of just the dates that the commission actually met for each year. And then the next page has a summary, a very high level summary of the different types of presentations that we heard. So I highlighted here that we were able to publish the dashboard. We had that COVID presentation from the Crime and Justice Institute. We had the presentation we gave about sentence credits. And then we provided updates regarding AB 236, again, in coordination with the Crime and Justice Institute. And then updates about what the coordinating council did in getting them up and going. So the next thing I highlighted in the report was one thing I'm very proud of is our data, criminal justice data advances. We've been able to provide things that no one has ever been able to do before, and which is what I was hoping we could do. And so we now have this regular data set we're getting from the Nevada Department of Corrections. And what I have here, which we are going to hopefully have this to show you next time, is we've just recently worked with the Division of Parole and Probation to establish their monthly data set they'll be able to provide to us. And so we're going to be working on a dashboard of that data, and we'll be able to provide additional analysis. And so I highlight the data dashboard that we're able to publish here. As you know, we've set up the monthly data dispatches that we send out, and we post these on our website, and we send them to our listserv so that everyone can stay up to date on what's happening with the prison population and any discoveries we may have noticed. I provide here a summary of where we're at with Justice Counts. That's another accomplishment for the year, and what we're hoping to make some progress with that. So one of the statutory requirements for the commission is to measure outcomes from AB 236. As we presented last time, we still are a little bit limited in the data because we've just barely started getting the regular data that we need. And so So I just, what we discussed last time was maybe looking towards the goals of Justice Reinvestment Initiative to guide how to analyze the data. And we just started with our prison resources being focused on serious and violent offenders. And so that's been just the limited scope of the AB 236 analysis. And so this is where if there's additional feedback that the commission would like included, we could do that. And I think very similar to the discussion we just had about the bill and the BDR, this would be an opportunity for us to provide that, right? So in response to these presentations, different members of the commissions had concerns or questions or brought up this issue. So it becomes more of a policy brief about here are the different perspectives of each analysis. But we can explore this and see what the commission is comfortable with and what direction you would like us to go. So the next few pages take the data we presented last time in the context of our prison resources focused on serious and violent offenders and summarizes that and summarizes our findings from last time in analyzing the trends in just the total population. The data we were going to present today was related to admissions and releases. And because we weren't able to present that today, it will not be included in the comprehensive report. But when we make that presentation in February, we'll be able to include that in a future report of the commission, or maybe even a separate report if you like to measure some AB 236 outcomes. Our findings showed from the prison population, the majority of the prison population is category A or B based on the scope of serious and violent we presented. And so I just incorporated some of the visuals that we presented last time. And some of the high level findings we had. Another one was the highest occurring offense group among category A and B is violence. And so I have the data here to represent that. And then we have that analysis we presented to the commission regarding the new commitments who have 0 priors. So one of the questions we've received in the past was concerning the criminal history of those who have been admitted to prison, even if they don't have any prior felonies. What does their additional criminal history look like? And so we provided our findings here related to that even among those new commitments with 0 priors, the majority of those are also serious and violent when it comes to their criminal history that is not related to a felony. And then, of course, we know that the prison population is quite low right now for our state. And so we put in just some information regarding that as a finding. And then based on the conclusion that we brought to this commission, our finding was the majority of the prison population resources are focused on serious and violent offenders. And again, this is an area where we talked about a little bit last time. And then anything that the commission would like us to include here, this would be a great place for me to get some of that feedback and make sure it's part of the discussion. And then pursuant to our statutory requirements for the report, including recommendations. And so as we just talked about, the commission did approve parts of recommendations to improve what I refer to as implementation of AB 236. And again, this could be another area. We're going to meet in January, but I could work on reviewing those minutes and incorporating some of that discussion here as well, so it's on the record. And then, of course, the recommendation to request an appropriation for the coordinating council based on those costs avoided to provide the coordinating council with the funding it needs to fund grants that will reduce recidivism. And then the last major section of the report is I just shared a quick summary of that project that we proposed at the last meetings to start studying reentry and recidivism, which we will do over the next 2 years, and just introduce that as the next big project for the commission, and that we'll have reports regarding that. As I said, I'm very much looking forward to input from the commission and anything that you would like to see in this report. Last time, it was more of a summary of just everything we've done. Like I said, trying to take a little bit different approach here to highlight key findings, and then would like to incorporate additional perspectives and policy analysis the commission would like included. So with that, I'll turn the time back over to the vice chair for any questions or comments and other maybe possible concerns regarding the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez. What questions does the commission have, if any? Dorico?
Hi, thank you, Vice Chair. Director Gonzalez already hit on this, but just a thought I had on page 11 with the recommendations to improve implementation of AB 236. I liked everything was there, and I know we had this discussion on agenda item number 4. Maybe just a paragraph in there adding to just say what transpired today and where we're going to go and move from there might kind of clean that up and make it very simple without having to, reword and change everything. And that's the only comment I have.
Thank you. Professor Lanterman?
Thank you, Vice Chair Brady. This is Jennifer Lanchman for the record. I just have a question about the piece about the coordinating council issuing grants that reduce recidivism. And I'm curious how that is determined. So does the council use a rubric that involves like assessment of proposals, whether or not they involve or whether those proposals include designated evidence-based practices, promising practices? Does that rubric, if it exists, include an evaluation requirement? So I want to make sure that we are, one, using the resources available to us in the most efficient and effective way, but also the phrase reducing recidivism is used a lot and is not often informed by what we understand actually reduces recidivism. So I just like to understand that process a little more.
Thank you so much for that question, Dr. Lancherman. That is the next step for the Coordinating Council. So the meetings for the coming year will be hearing presentations to start exploring how to do this so they can start developing those. They have not developed a rubric, and you bring up a good point about also there's several pieces there, not only about performance measures, but about how are we actually going to address how to measure reducing recidivism. And so I will reach out to you and maybe get some coordinate with you on get some ideas or and see on what types of presentations I should get lined up for the Coordinating Council to help them educate them. So the next several meetings will be getting educated and learning how to do that. And then I think would be appropriate for this commission because I see the Coordinating Council as like almost like a subcommittee of the commission. And so as the commission wants to pass down guidance to the Coordinating Council when it comes to developing those, that's what I will do. So at the discretion of the commission, of course, I will take some of this back to the Coordinating Council as guidance about what we need to be working on with the Coordinating Council and developing a rubric and developing those measures and what's next. And then what I can do is as those are developed as part of my director's report, come back to this commission and let you know where we're at with that and summarize just quickly, here's how it's going with developing these, and then get additional feedback from the commission and providing guidance if that works.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Oh,
sorry, Kimberly Moe for the record. I was just going to tell the director that GHHS, the grants management unit, has very good rubrics for their victim services grants. And so that might be something to at least work off of or to get a good idea off of, because they're also trying to evaluate programs and what's good programming, what's not appropriate programming, things like that. So it might be at least a good starting point for some material to work off of for you.
Thank you very much. I need that.
right. Any other? Seeing none, I'll close out agenda item 6 and open agenda item 7. Update on.
Sorry, Vice Chair, if we can go back, actually, we need to go back and get an approval from the commission on the report. And so I just wanted to offer what I can do is put together some of this feedback and then circulate a revised version for the commission and get some feedback as we work towards submitting. And if we don't meet towards the January 15th, depending on the motion that the commission puts forth here, something like if you move to have me continue to finalize the report and include the items that were discussed today, and then circulate a copy to the commission in advance of the submission date of January 15th, then we would do that. And so if the commission's not ready to approve the report, I understand that too. I just wanted to make sure we address that issue.
Well, I think we can do that by motion. So does anyone have a motion, or otherwise I will propose the motion that the department continue working to finalize the report and incorporate the comments that were mentioned today, and that the report be the updated draft be distributed for the commission's review prior to the submission date of January 15th. Did I get it all in there? Do I have a second for that motion?
Kimberly Mole, I second.
Thank you. Chair, do you think we could just take a voice vote, or do you want to? Okay,
Yeah, if they could do it by muting yourself if that is
Okay.
comfortable for the commission.
perfect. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All
Aye.
those opposed? Say nay. Okay, any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Thank you, Director. So now we can close out item number 6 and open agenda item number 7, update on project to study reentry and recidivism in Nevada. At our last meeting, the NDSP staff introduced our next big project to study reentry and recidivism in our state. They presented an overall goals of the project and what we hope to accomplish. We also heard about a study the staff initiated regarding parole violators. I will now turn the time over to the Nevada Department of Sentencing staff again to share updates regarding this project. Director Gonzalez.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brady. Our focus today is to present some more findings from our parole violator project. Specifically, we will share findings related to homelessness among parolees and its potential impacts to recidivism. In building this project and organizing presentations for the commission, we have brainstormed many issues that are related to reentry and recidivism. Based on the issues we identified, we will do what we can to choose an issue or two each meeting and then focus our data and presentations on that issue. As homelessness is our focus today, the findings Ms. Powers will present from the parole violator project are specific to this issue. You will note that the presentation in the next agenda item is specific to this issue as well. If the response to today's presentations identify other issues and ideas for other presentations, we will add those to our list and schedule them for a future meeting. I also wanted to address the issue that came up during our last meeting regarding confidentiality. I want to thank you sincerely for the feedback and the collaboration of the commission members to refine and improve our work. It's an ongoing process. As many of you probably heard the saying, it's a journey, right? Not a destination, especially when it comes to data. And so I just want to thank you again for that feedback. So I want to give you an update on where we are in regards to that feedback. So what we're doing right now is we are researching confidentiality in a research context compared to a legal context. So that's a great point. That distinction was brought up. And as again, we're exploring the scope of our work and what we're working on. It's important to understand those terms of art in those respective areas. And so as we need additional input, we'll reach out to flesh that out. So as we are continuing our research in that area, we have removed the word confidential from the waiver and reinforced our methods to ensure that the information we house is anonymous. The preliminary findings of our research have led us to begin developing an amendment to our bill to provide confidentiality protections for those who submit information to our agency. So we realize this is going to be a possibility, and as the bill we've talked about already, I will bring this information to the commission and see if there's a consensus there that we explore this opportunity for our agency and the data and information we collect. We're going to need to craft this language that's appropriate to our work, but codifying a provision like this will ensure additional protections for the information we collect and house. So with that, at the pleasure of the Vice Chair, I will now turn the time to Ms. Powers.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Just before Ms. Powers, I see a hand up. And Vice Chair, did you want to address that right now? Because I'm going to guess it's about what I just said, and I didn't want to distract from Ms. Powers' presentation. Is that okay, Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Hi, Jim Hoffman for the record. That's correct. It is about what Director Gonzalez just said. So are people still being specifically asked about ongoing cases they have? Is that still a thing that's happening right now? Or is that on pause while we reevaluate the policy issues?
I guess, what do you mean, are they being asked about their case? Because the majority of our questions are about their housing, their opportunities, their programming, their support system. That's the thrust of the question. So that's not the purpose of our interviews and the information we're collecting.
I understand. I understand that's not the purpose, but as I recall, it was questions about like, what did you do that got you revoked? What were you, were you using drugs? Were you doing crimes again? It's like, it's my concern with it at the last meeting was that it's encouraging people to give information that could affect revocation cases that are still pending. And so are those questions still being asked?
I guess I guess I don't want to get too off track here because of the information we're going to present. So we're not specifically asking what crimes you committed. I guess just the way you just paraphrased what the questions were aren't actually what we're asking. Like, I know that's what it feels like. So I guess what we need to do is go back and what we could do if you like is we could look at it again, and then I can show you what we've refined. But again, the thrust of it is about what they've done. And if it's about use, it's about use related to programming, not about use. I'm just saying we're not asking the question like that.
I should have been more careful in how I phrased it. As a defense lawyer, my job is kind of to look for what is the worst possible interpretation of this? How could this be used against my client? And I understand that, you're asking like open-ended questions that may or may not prompt admissions of criminal behavior. But my concern is that we shouldn't be asking those questions at all, or else if we are asking those questions, there should be very strong, clear, binding kind of guardrails that prevent that from being used against these people. And from what I'm hearing, you guys are working on figuring out what those guardrails should be, but I'm still concerned that until the guardrails are actually in place, this is a potential constitutional violation for these people.
So I guess the guardrail, based on what you brought up last time, was the promise of what would be done with the information. And what I just stated was we did make that adjustment. So we took out, again, this is voluntary. Again, the information they share with us is not intended to be shared, but we're going to do our best to keep it anonymous. The other thing I'll add is we are not a law enforcement agency. And so we would not be in the position to violate anyone's constitutional right. And offline, I did share information that we did consult with the chair about how to proceed, and that because of our position as researchers, and as long as we appropriately use the term of art for research, and we put in the guardrails of the anonymity protection and how we are housing our case notes, that I thought were the guardrails. Because again, I think it's one question, and I can pull it up. I think it was one question that was of concern, and we've adjusted that question. And also then to protect everyone, we're trying to protect all that information, right, about what's being collected, because it's to protect their anonymity as well. So I guess, does that help answer your question at all, or?
It does, but I feel like it still leaves us in kind of the same position we were at the last meeting, because I understand that like the department's intent is not to provide this information to law enforcement, that the intent is to protect the confidentiality of people. But if a prosecutor goes to the court and says, hey, the Department of Sentencing Policy has these interviews, I need access to them, the judge is going to grant that probably. Or if another defense attorney comes to the judge and says, hey, I need to discover these, like, just because you have internal policies that are meant to keep things confidential, that doesn't mean that you can control what a court will do or what law enforcement will do or what another defense lawyer might do. So my concern is that these safeguards and these guardrails, I guess, it doesn't seem to me like they're strong enough yet. And in the absence of more work on this, I guess my preference would be that the department just not ask that question, until we get a more kind of externally binding guardrail in place.
Yeah, and I think it in the effort to, because it's also about protecting, I guess in order to protect both sides of it, we need to protect all of it, right? If we're going to protect both sides of it, we need to protect all of it. And so I will figure out how we can navigate that. And like I mentioned, we're working on an amendment that I think would address exactly the concern that you're talking about. And so until that amendment passes, we've made these other adjustments to make sure that we're not walking up to that line. And so I'd be happy, and what we can do is what I can do is figure out what we can put together that will protect the proprietary or protect the mechanics of this, because we're trying to protect everybody now, right? And I value the input of what we're trying to do here. And so again, maybe what we can do is again coordinate a way to communicate this information that will protect everyone and see how we can get to where everyone feels that we've got all of our bases covered.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, I just want to stress, I really love the idea of getting more information about why people revoke. I really love all of the parts of this program that the department is doing, except for this one specific piece. And I definitely think like an amendment to the statute or something. That's the kind of thing that would be like a strong guardrail that would assuage my concerns.
Perfect. So
I hope we can continue to work on that. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So what I'll do is when I have that language, I will, and I'm hoping to have, maybe what I'll do is to have some of that ready for our January meeting, so we can start getting your input and making sure that, because again, from this perspective, I'm new to this area with how to make sure we have that protection. So I'll be looking for input from this commission about that. So I'll make sure to have something prepared for the January meeting so we can navigate that and have it ready for an amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the time back to Ms. Powers.
Okay, let me share. All right. You can see my screen. Okay. I'm excited to share. Thank you, Vice Chair and Commission, Georgia Powers for the record. I'm excited to share more of this project with you. Today's presentation is a bird's eye level overview of where parolees live when they are released onto parole from the Nevada Department of Corrections. To review, during this project, I am only speaking to parole violators who return to custody in the north through Northern Nevada Correctional Center intake. The total count of people I've seen so far is now at 47. So, while the Department of Corrections, the Parole Board, and the Division of Parole and Probation work in conjunction to release parolees, the authority for approving the housing plan falls to the division. The Parole Board grants the parole, and once a housing plan is approved by PMP, then DOC will release the offender. Whether they are eligible or granted, policy still does not allow for actual release until the housing has been approved. Illustrated, here is the initial approved housing plan for the 47 people I have spoken with as reported during the interviews. 16 people released to some sort of program or halfway house. 15 went to friends or family. 10 went to a weekly motel. 4 went to a shelter, and 2 went to self-supplied residence like an apartment or a house that they already had. Represented here is the average time on parole prior to possible revocation by release plan type. This is the originally approved release plan. This does not mean that they lived there the entire time they were on parole. Any moves are discussed between the parolee and officer and ultimately are approved or denied by the division. Here, the average time out for those who left straight to a self-supplied residence was 18 months, 7.8 months for living with friends or family, 10 months for leaving to a halfway house or a program, 4.6 months if released to the shelter, and 4.2 months if they went to a weekly motel. In my last presentation, you saw this slide depicting what resources and needs the parolees feel are needed. Here, it is updated from the prior presentation with all subsequent interview sessions. Housing remains one of the top 3 needs as expressed by the interviewees. Also last time, I showed you quotes from participants. I think these are very important. All of the comments today are regarding housing. You will continue to hear me say that the experience of the participants, as told by the participants, is very relevant qualitative information to be studied along with the quantitative data. I believe this ongoing project is very informative. I hope you see the value of it and my excitement to be involved in it. We are still working with small numbers, and it will be interesting as the project goes on to see how the breakdown of information shifts or not. So far, the more questions we ask, the more questions we have. Today's topic of housing has already brought many more interesting ancillary topics to light. We will continue our research into what housing and resources are available to the re-entering citizens of Nevada. And as always, if anything presented today has sparked specific questions or areas of interest for a spotlight presentation, please let us know and we can look more deeply into that topic for a future meeting. At this point, I will turn it back over to Vice Chair for any questions.
Thank you. What questions does the commission have? Oh, Ms. Mole?
Thank you. Kimberly Moe for the record. So first I want to tell you, I found this very, very interesting. I would say interesting. I can't think of the right word. I won't say sad, but sad to read, but informative. We'll go with informative. I was shocked to even see that weekly motels were an option as to being considered a I guess as a secure, safe housing option for someone to go to, just knowing the victimization that goes on in weeklies. And so that brings me to my question. Do you or have you considered asking individuals in a way, we'd have to form the 1 or 2 questions in a trauma-informed way about if either while incarcerated or in the time after, if they've been victimized in any way. Because one, I think that is something that I know we've talked about before of, how can we expect individuals that are further traumatized or that are harmed in some way within the correction system to then be released and to go into the world and not react to that. But also in that period of after they're released, if we're, I don't say endorsing, but saying, okay, this is a safe or an appropriate option for you to go to a weekly, or we're only giving you $20 or things like this, that in any other scenario or any other part of the population, we would look at and say, this doesn't seem like a good healthy step for someone. So in that period of time, I could see, and I think it's probably worth asking if they've somehow in that time period been victimized or re-victimized in any way, and that through that process or through that trauma maybe has also led them back into the system. Just because if you notice at the shelter and at the weekly, it's such a higher rate, and the friends and family too, such a higher rate of return back into or quicker return into the system. And so I just know from what I do, the corresponding things to those things in each one of those scenarios is high rates of victimization. And so I'm curious if that's something we're missing, or if that's a step that, you know, as a state, if we could identify, look, you know, we have lots of individuals that are going into shelter once they get out, and in the shelters, they're experiencing trauma, or they're experiencing trauma in going back home. You know, well, did we do a good enough job if we're releasing specifically, you know, female formerly incarcerated individuals back home? Or are they going back home to an abuser? Because we know there's a very high rate in Nevada from the victim services world of domestic violence victims going to jail for defending themselves and for fighting back kind of issues. And so are we then releasing them back into the home and then expecting them not to end up back in, or some kind of violation or something to that? So I just think that there's one or two questions that could be added, and some more data that could be tracked, that we can make sure that if there's a need, which I know there is, statistically there is, that maybe at least if we had the data to show it and to prove it on a state level, then we could maybe apply for federal grants or programming to then get more resources to help individuals with that, because we actually have the data to back it up. So that's a thought process.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'll definitely reach out to see what types of questions we might be able to ask that would fit into this project well, so that we could do more trauma-informed decision-making as a state.
Mr. Hoffman?
Thank you. So first, I wanted to thank Ms. Powers for gathering this information. This is all super helpful, and I think really informative about the policy challenges. I had two kind of suggestions that I think could make this even better. The first one is, I know you said this is just the Northern Nevada Correctional Center. I understand that for logistical reasons, that's probably the easiest one for you to get to. I would encourage you to also look at, you know, Southern Nevada and the rurals, see if there's any patterns there that are different. That could maybe help us figure out, you know, oh, Reno does a much better job with transitional housing than Las Vegas does, that kind of thing. My second sort of suggestion would be, I think it could also be helpful to ask about where people were living before they were revoked, in addition to where they want to live afterwards. I think having both the before and after could also help us maybe tease out some policy trends or issues that we would want to address. But overall, I think this is great. Like I said, I think this is a great project. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have talked about a better timeline of residents, and so that is definitely something we wanted to do. And expanding to Southern Nevada, basically there are only two places that people would come in for intake, which would be in Las Vegas and here in Carson City. And so we have talked about maybe setting up something up video-wise, but absolutely something we want to do to expand. Thank you.
Mr. Ponder?
Yes, John Ponder for the record, and thank you for that very thorough report. Just a couple of questions, and I'll echo what Mr. Hoffman indicated about doing that in Southern Nevada. I think it's something that is very much needed. Couple of questions. Out of the 47 that was the violators, how many were actually released on parole out of those 47? Any indication of that?
Do you mean original? They were all pending a parole violation. So they all were out on parole and came back. I'm only seeing parole pending parole violators at this point. So I do have information about who went back out again, but that's a different presentation.
Okay. And any sense of how long the process took from the time they made their parole until they had the approval, at the house, right, to be released to that residence? What kind of time frame? Any sense of that?
We actually have presented that previously when we were talking about the way temp revs work. And I am able to get that information. I actually have been working on that for a presentation that is coming about how long it was from the time that they came in to the time that they were again released on parole.
Okay. And then lastly, and I think Ms. Maul had alluded to this, with the high rate of return from folks that have gone home to family or friends, are we taking a deeper look into what that approval process is? Because apparently someone had gone out to the home, someone gave the home a thumbs up, but yet still there's back to the family, there was something that, such a high rate of return for those returning back to the family. So I'd like to, I think it'd be good to know, what that approval process looked like, right? Because someone went out to the home and said, yes, this is a good idea, but there's such a high rate of people returning.
That would be me getting together with parole and probation and maybe seeing what their approval process looks like. I do also know that there aren't a lot of places for people to go. So that's one of the problems we're going to see, is that there aren't very many approvable places. And so to be able to get them out, we'll have to look a little more deeply at that approval process.
Right. And again, that challenge exists in Southern Nevada. So I'd be very interested in taking a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Just piggybacking off of what Mr. Ponder was saying, I have a question, and maybe when you speak with PMP, you can follow up on this. So let's say somebody has served their time and they don't have anywhere to go. Like maybe the shelter isn't even a good option, or if they or their family or their previous home, it's really not safe, but they've served their time. If they've got nowhere to go, what happens then? Do they remain in custody past their sentencing? They're past what they were sentenced to serve, or what? Or is that why they're going into sometimes substandard housing situations?
I'm going to speak from my experience as a caseworker at NDOC prior. Their discharge date is their discharge date. If they expire their sentence, they're done. There's no keeping anyone. As far as going out on parole, they must have an approved plan. So there are people who stay past their date so that people are making sure that it is a good plan for them. Everyone is doing their due diligence to make sure, or to try to make sure, that people are going to a place that works for them.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just wanted to clear up a couple of things right quick. Aaron Evans from the Division of Parole and Probation. Ms. Powers, can you go back to the slide that references the time prior to revocation for each release plan? Because I think Mr. Ponder was confused or didn't understand what that slide was saying. When they go, that's the amount of time that they're out. And I might have confused it too myself. So their own residence, right? They last the longest before being brought back. And as I look at this again, I am kind of questioning now why that friends or family is lower than that. But forgive me for that. But then to the Vice Chair's question, if they have no plan that can be approved, like they don't have an acceptance to a program, They don't have their own residence. They don't have any friends or family that they go to. A shelter release is our absolute last opportunity. They have to be released at some point, and that is our absolute lowest, last chance, because we can't keep them in prison any longer. So the shelter release is a last ditch. Cannot get them approved anywhere else.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Powers and Director Gonzalez for that presentation. If there are no other questions or comments about that presentation, I'm going to close out agenda item number 7 and open agenda item number 8 on the presentation by the Nevada Homeless Alliance. The executive director of the Nevada Homeless Alliance contacted the staff to discuss how that organization and the commission could collaborate on issues related to reentry. Executive Director Katrina Grisby Thedford is here to tell us her story and teach us about her organization and their efforts. Director, the time is yours.
Oh, me. Previously, when you said director, it was Director Gonzalez. So I would
apologize for that.
That is fine. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. You guys see that? So first of all, I would like to really thank you guys for allowing me to come here today to share a little bit about my story, a little bit about my agency, and some things that I'm currently working on as it relates to this topic, prison to homelessness. So again, my name is Katrina Grigsby Thedford. I'm the executive director of Nevada Homeless Alliance. I'm also a UNLV Doctor of Public Policy student. Today, my focus, of course, will be on my story, but I want to also discuss a very important issue that many of our citizens, specifically returning citizens, are experiencing today. So when I talk about returning citizen, my focus is on those individuals who were recently discharged from prison after expiring their sentences. And we'll also briefly touch on individuals who are eligible for parole and are stuck in prison because they don't have approved residence, as well as individuals being discharged to marginal housing and how all that affects recidivism. So I'm also a person with lived experience of substance dependence, homelessness, incarcerating, and being, discharged to marginal housing while on parole, which led to homelessness. So, just a little bit about myself. I have more arrests than you can count on your fingers and toes, and add a multiplier. So just due to a long life of substance use and multiple arrests, I ended up with a possession charge in the early 2000s, around 2005, put on probation, violated, and was sent to prison from Reno. I was up north for a little while, but I did most of my time down south in Jean Camp. When it was time to be released on parole, I was sent to an approved home for felons. It was not a good fit for me in hindsight. It was not conducive to recovery or staying out of prison. In my opinion, it was about collecting money, but I was happy because I was out of prison. So I stayed there for about 2 weeks and left. Every time I went to see my PO, I would tell him I was still staying there. I did my UAs, presented my check stubs and meeting slips, and that was it. There was no structure. I started couch surfing soon after, and I kept my job. About 2 months later, I bought a car, and then I slept in my car all the way from about March of 2007 to I completed my probation in July. So I didn't have any idea of resources to get housing. For one, I was scared to tell my PO that I had left the place that was approved, thinking I would violate, which I probably would have. And for two, it was, being released to this marginal housing was not safe, and like I mentioned earlier, not conducive to my recovery. So the day after I saw my PO for the last time in July 2007, when he said, "You're done, you did great. I wish a lot of other people were like you," I relapsed the next day. So I spent July 2007 through October 2009 on the streets, literally homeless, in and out of jail, and everything that goes along with trying to make and get more money to use and to feed my addiction. My addiction escalated back to where it was prior to prison, and I was homeless. I wasn't prepared mentally and emotionally for just freedom. I wasn't prepared socially because I didn't have family in town. I had no social support. It was just me. But the funny part about it, that no one asked me about that when I was leaving prison, right? Social supports. I'm sure if they would have asked me about it and I would have been able to share that and we had resources in our community, things may have been different. So fast forward, I got arrested the last time in 2009, went to rehab and been sober ever since, right? I haven't even been pulled over by the police since then. So that's great. So since 2009, I went back to school, got an AA degree in psychology, a Bachelor of Social Work, Master of Public Administration. I'm currently going to be Dr. Katrina next May, even though I had a really colorful background 13 short years ago and a few years prior to that. So in my career, in my field, I worked for the Salvation Army for many years. And when I worked at the shelter, I would have contact with people who were discharged from prison, meaning expired their sentences. They were dropped off at the Greyhound bus station with their bus passes, some gate money, 30 days of medication, maybe a birth certificate or social security card, and the clear bag. Like they showed up with this clear bag and all their blues on. So this sparked something in me. And I talked to my bosses at the Salvation Army. At this time, I was being promoted to a vocational case manager for homeless adults. And, you know, I wanted to start helping these people. So we reached out to the Department of Corrections and we started a little thing where we would interview people before they were released. I think release means parole and discharged if they expired. And we would pick them up from the Greyhound bus station, provide them with a place to stay, 3 meals, job development, pre-employment training. But most of these people were on parole. So I saw this thing and I'm like, this shouldn't be happening, right? And so we worked on a program to interview individuals while they were still in prison in their office with their case manager about 6 months before they were released. And even though living in our program was considered homeless because it is transitional housing, right? I think like the end of the Casa Grande transitional housing, I'm not sure if that's considered homeless by HUD definition, but in my field, we go by HUD definitions and transitional housing is considered homeless, but at least they were sheltered and homeless. I eventually moved to Veteran Services and I worked there for 9 years, all the way up from a case manager to assistant coordinator where I oversaw 4 veterans programs. And I noticed that when veterans were discharged or released, they had access to appropriate housing because the VA works closely with their veterans in the system. Of course, the VA has a lot of money, right? We know that, and they can hire these licensed clinical social workers to do this work. And I like the way that was looking. But I know in our system, system as it relates to incarceration, prison specifically, and housing is really not linked together, right? But I noticed like in general, when people who expired their sentence, they were still left out. So I began working on a doctorate degree, and in my research, I'm finding that, most communities talk about reentry, but they're primarily talking about people on parole. So I started thinking, like, why are those who expired their sentences left out? It's like they're invisible. I couldn't find any statistics in our state about how many people are discharged after they expire their sentence to homelessness. I know there are many because I used to work with them and I still see individuals in my role as the director of Nevada Homeless Alliance. So I started wondering, why isn't our state tracking, analyzing, and sharing this data, right? If we want to reduce recidivism, we have to look at the correlation between homelessness and recidivism, the correlation between poverty and recidivism, poverty and homelessness. There's a link, right? So how can we ensure that our returning citizens are linked to housing? So I started doing more research and here we are, right? This kind of draws on my professional experience more than my personal experience, but my personal experience of being in and out of legal systems, as well as being in Nevada Department of Corrections, and coupled with my education and, you know, my professional experience and my desire to help individuals is kind of pushing me where I'm going. So as a professional who work in homeless services in Southern Nevada, I witnessed these people being discharged from multiple institutions, not just prison, but jails, hospitals, detox facilities, you know, behavioral health, mental health, detox, whatever that looks like, right? However, my focus is on those who are discharged from prison or granted parole without an approved address, or, you know, released from prison to marginal housing. So I think, you know, in that, not saying that the other things aren't important, but, you know, in my opinion, we can get a better sample and create pilot programs or whatever this looks like for these individuals, and maybe start some best practices and then move on to these other bigger things like discharges from jails and, you know, patient dumping from the hospitals. That'll be me looking into that. So I firmly believe that housing is a human right, especially for our most vulnerable. As we have ongoing conversations about ending homelessness and decreasing recidivism, we have to get to a point where we see the invisible lines. We can't end homelessness without addressing homeless inflow from institutions. We can't really discuss decreasing recidivism when our system is not set up to assist folks with vital needs such as housing. We're doing really, really great in some areas, but I think that a lot more needs to be done. Again, I don't think that prison exit should be a homeless entry point. One second. So just really quick, you know, everyone sees this point in time count. We know that homelessness is a problem in our community. So we're not going to go through this, but the thing is, how many of these 5,645 people had a prior residence of prison, right? Our homeless system isn't tracking this data either. So let's talk about prison. So Nevada has an incarceration rate of 713 per 100,000 people. National research suggests that, wait, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah. A national research suggests that up to 15% of incarcerated people experience homelessness in the year before admission to prison. This is national research. I want to know what our state research says, right? So we're going to get to some recommendations and what I think we should do. If this, I don't know if this is the right outlet for this information, but I'm thinking so. People who have been to prison just once experience homelessness at a rate nearly 7 times higher than the general public. People who have been incarcerated more than once have rates 13 times higher than the general public. I think this is significant. So why are we talking about prison and homelessness? Because there's a direct correlation between prison, poverty, recidivism, and homelessness. Match any two together, there's a correlation in the country and in our state. In fact, city and state level studies of homeless shelters find that many formerly incarcerated people rely on shelters both immediately after release and over the long term. So when I was looking at some information from the sentencing policy, I noticed that there were 5,720 individuals released from the NDOC in 2020. And of those, of course, more were granted parole, about 4,030, and about 1,587 were discharged. Of those discharged, like there's no stats to show how many people had no social support and succumbed to homelessness. How many of those individuals who were dropped off at that Greyhound bus station had family to pick them up or took the bus to a shelter, right? And so I've heard comments, you know, once individuals are released or discharged and they expire their sentence, they're no longer a ward of the state. People don't want to give their addresses out, right? So if we want to decrease the cost of prison and decrease recidivism and build the taxpaying potential of our communities and start spending some of this taxpayer money on education and things like that, besides stuff, and spend less on homelessness and prison, we need to make sure that individuals who are expiring their sentence are provided with some type of support. And, if an individual doesn't want to give their address out, it could be a simple drop down at discharge. Where are you going? Home, with friends and families, to transitional housing, to a drug and alcohol treatment program. I don't know, shelter, right? And so we can get a feel of where people are going and without asking for addresses. Because as I know, when you're getting out, like, you don't want to share any information, especially specific information, but simple drop downs to see where individuals who are expiring their sentences are going is going to be helpful for determining these correlations between homelessness and incarceration, and maybe in the future formulating some type of strategic plans for addressing this, because we can't continue to work in silos. They're not ward of the state anymore. And so that's the community's problem. But yet when they go back into prison, recidivism costs money. And then being in prison costs money, right? And so working together as a community will be one of the things that I want to look at to see how we can help solve this problem. And of those people that returned to prison in that sentencing policy report, within 36 months, our community has no way of knowing if they experience homelessness or housing insecurity because that data is not tracked. However, if this data is tracked, it is just not shared because I couldn't find it. So there's a link between poverty and incarceration. There's a link between homelessness and recidivism. But where are those numbers? I really like Georgia's presentation because it kind of is a start. Like, we're actually looking at these things because they're vitally important. Our prison and homeless systems do not share data. So our prisons, and somebody can correct me when I'm done, are not collecting housing status at entry and exit for the purpose of analyzing how their housing status could have been a factor in recidivism. So I'm thinking, I know this information is collected, right? For the purpose of censuses and things like that, right? However, the NDOC does collect data on education of inmates, right? How long the person was employed prior to prison, behavioral health information, such as substance use and mental health diagnosis, if that person was in foster care, veteran status, how many children they have, but housing is not collected and analyzed. And this is a problem. So I think we have to get to a point to where we are looking at more than criminogenic risk factors when determining the probability of recidivism. That's really important, but housing status of these individuals are equally important. So another statistic says that almost 50,000 people a year enter homeless shelters immediately after exiting incarceration. So without addressing this housing issue, I can't stop saying this, individuals will continue to be released from prison to homelessness or unstable housing. The inflow to homelessness will continue to increase and recidivism will continue. When people don't have a safe place to go after prison, they are high risk of recidivism, and having a place to call home is a foundation where those recently released from prison can rebuild their lives, obtain employment, and improve their health and achieve recovery. Many will say this is an individual problem. You got yourself in this mess, you committed a crime, now it's on you. But really, this is a system problem. So I just did a little research, and we're not going to go through this about the Sentencing Commission and all the acronyms that falls under there. And I think that, I highlighted some of the highlights in my research. For me, is that the Sentencing Commission, their vision is to, unify criminal justice data and ensure Nevada criminal justice policy are data-driven and fiscally practical. the Nevada Justice, I'll just say reinvestment, and there's probably 3 more acronyms in that, letters in that acronym. It kind of talks about how they are providing, input to the commission about matters that are important at the local area. I think housing is important at the local level, right? And so, as I was looking at AB 236, it talks about minimizing barriers to successful reentry. And I think the main barrier to successful reentry is housing. So where are we with looking at that, right? So this information could be in a building, in a file room, on somebody's database, but I've been researching for 2 years and I am unable to find information about how we are looking at how homelessness and housing instability correlates with recidivism. So, I gave this presentation to another agency, and we talked about Department of Corrections and the Nevada Interagency Council on Homelessness. I noticed that the Department of Corrections used to have a reentry task force that hasn't met since 2018, which is one thing that I'll be recommending. They talk about, reducing recidivism, collaborative partnerships, stable housing, employment, and treatment as success. And the Nevada Interagency Council on Homelessness is currently working on their 2023 strategic plan, and I'm pushing them to make sure they include discharge planning and practices from prison, connect to housing prior to discharge, and make sure that no one is discharged to the streets. So I don't know if any of you guys are on that Governor's Nevada Interagency Council on Homelessness. I know that Deputy Director Brian Williams is on that council, and I think it's important that we have the desire in our community. We have different agencies working on different things, but success will be determined by our collaboration. And you guys, I've been researching for 2 years, but a lot of you guys on here probably know what prison and homelessness costs, right? So, some research says that American taxpayers pay approximately $80 billion towards annual prison costs a year. And, we know prison costs are a huge part of state and federal governments, right? So some of this money is being drained away from early education initiatives, state universities, and other essential services. So recidivism is expensive too. According to One Surge of Research, a single recidivism event could cost taxpayers up to $50,000 when you think about everything that goes into arresting and transporting and holding and courts and all these different things, right? So this is the annual estimate, and I'm not sure what a single recidivism event costs in our state because I can't find that information. So homelessness is costly as well. Clark County estimates that Nevada taxpayers spend approximately $73,000 per year for services for one homeless individual. That's a lot, right? On the national scale, it costs approximately $69,000 to house one person in prison. And I was told that here, the NDOC, a medium custody inmate is about $29,000 to $32,000 a year. Housing is much cheaper than homelessness or being in prison, right? Of course, people need to pay their debt to society when they commit a crime, but I think we can do ourselves a favor by looking at these costs and seeing how prisons and this commission and the Nevada Parole and Probation, as well as our continuum of care and housing providers, should be working closer together to address some of these gaps. So public safety is at risk when we're discharging people to homelessness or unstable housing. So you think of victimization, theft, property crimes, the list goes on. So a lot of solutions are being advanced, but what seemed to lack is what's clearly essential: a safe, supportive, and affordable place to live. Without that, people cannot work, get essential treatment to address mental health and substance use, causing them to engage in illegal activities and threaten public safety. If this issue of discharging inmates to homelessness is addressed, public safety will increase, Taxpayers will save money from fees caused by recidivism. Homeless inflow may decrease, and we'll be able to grow the state and federal resources by increasing the tax-paying potential of our communities. So somebody had a slide earlier, I think Georgia, she had way more on her slide, but these are many of the things that returning citizens need. And I think oftentimes the focus is, do you have an approved address when it comes down to parole and probation? And, are you going to your meetings and things like that? We forget about social supports and a person's need for family reunification. So family reunification is not designed as going to stay with your family. Oftentimes there needs to be a plan that a social worker or counselor helps this family make, right? Who knows how the prison stay could have affected that individual. And then they get home and all these things are thrown in their lap. You need to do this, you need to do that. And oftentimes people are not able to, get a chance to kind of figure out how to relive life, and it causes stress, right? Is these practices that we're using are not trauma informed. Okay, you have an address, go stay there. And oftentimes I think a lot of our inmates know this may not be a safe place, but I need an address. I need to get out of here, right? But of course, we can't look deep into the details of what that looks like. But like I said, social supports, even if it's community supports and family reunification, is just as important as all these other things. So how do we solve this problem of people being discharged from prison, going from one food line in prison to another food line in a homeless shelter? How do we make sure that people are not coming from this cot to sleeping on the streets or sleeping on a cot in a shelter? We do this by communication and collaboration. It's critical that our leaders, local, state, nonprofit, citizens, service providers, and people with experience of being discharged from prison to homelessness or marginal housing are working together to develop plans and ensure everyone has a safe and stable housing. We already know that sex offenders and individuals who have crimes for arson are going to be the biggest challenge, right? Like, we know that. So not all, but we need to make sure that people are at least getting resources. I have lists and lists. When I work with veterans, I could get a veteran arsonist housed today if he showed up at my door, right? So we think a lot of these things are impossible, but until we work together and find best practices from other agencies who are working on the ground with the populations, it's only speculation when you say, oh, there's no housing for sex offenders or arsonists, right? Because if we're not talking to the people who are housing the people, we really don't know what there is. And I can tell you from my experience that there are availabilities. So communication and collaboration is key to making sure that we are able to assist this population. So there's a lot of best practices and alternatives, right? We talked about the programs that the veterans have, but of course the VA has a lot of money. Another best practice, especially for individuals who are stuck in prison with nowhere to go, and the people who are being discharged to hotel motels or shelters, maybe they're the sex offenders, right? I don't know. But the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority has the ability to consider using guide from HUD that allows housing authorities the option to set aside vouchers for individuals exiting prison. So Secretary Fudge, I met with her about 3 times, and last year she, made some statements about how HUD is looking to address this issue. So one quote from her is, unfortunately, too many people exit prisons and jails in America without a stable home to return to. A significant number of people experiencing homelessness are caught in a revolving door between homelessness and reincarceration. In some states, the lack of stable housing can also delay a person's approval for discretionary release from prison, leading people to serve more time behind bars than those with stable housing. And, I found that HUD has a few initiatives. One is called Opening Doors. And, its goal is to safely increase access to public housing for people with conviction histories. There's been success in San Diego, Colorado, Delaware, Northern Illinois, Louisiana, Oklahoma City, Washington State. These Department of Corrections are working closely with the housing authorities to use this guidance from HUD that individuals that are discharging from prison are often eligible, and the housing authority can decrease some of the barriers for entry by working together. Of course, we got to know, again, that sex offenders and arsonists and people who are convicted for meth labs won't be, that's just written into the statute, right? But at the same time, there are many different options to ensure that individuals are linked to appropriate housing, and there's not going to be a 100% guarantee that people won't go back to prison. But if we were able to collect this data, create some programs, and collect that data, we can see what we need to do more as a state to decrease discharge to homelessness and or marginal housing. The Michigan State Housing Authority and then the Michigan DOC work together to provide housing opportunities for people who were formerly incarcerated. They set aside some housing choice vouchers for people on parole who met certain qualifications, and over 90% of those former inmates successfully completed parole over a 3-year period, right? So they had some really, really good numbers. I can share with you guys some of these statistics. I just did a policy brief that has all the references in it. So it's vital that our prison system prioritize housing wraparound services for inmates being released in the community without social support. The resources are in our community, so let's use them. But we can't do this if the data is not collected, right? We don't know the correlation, but we know there is one, but what does that look like in our state, right? In my opinion, we need to create a reentry task force, right? Like I mentioned earlier, there hasn't been a reentry task force meeting, I think since 2018, and that was under Sandoval. So I don't know if that is something that has to be made on a policy level, or can someone like my agency, who's been reaching out to a lot of individuals who are interested in being in this reentry working group, if we wanted to call it, are very interested. So I didn't know if things like this had to go through a legal construct or what it looks like, right? So I've reached out to a few people who would like to be involved in this, and I would like to initiate or push for this to happen. So another thing in AB 236, I am thinking that this may not be possible, but I think it only makes sense that in AB 236, some of the language and some of the data points to be collected need to be changed because, of course, with respects to prisons admissions, like you see on this sheet, right? We should be tracking housing status, right? We track all these other things. And so we got the Sentencing Commission, or under AB 236, ACAJ does this research and gathering information and whatever that looks like, right? Why aren't we gathering and analyzing the housing status at admissions, at discharge, and if people re-enter, right? In my opinion. So we must work as a system on data collection, right? Analysis and sharing. Again, homeless people see so many people who check the box. Last residence was a jail or prison, right? But if our system isn't sharing the data, we have no real way of knowing the correlation between homelessness and recidivism. Once we know the correlation, and there is one, we can work towards strategic solutions to address the issue and save our state and taxpayers money. Also, we need to ensure that our returning citizens are aware of their housing options prior to discharge, right? This should be happening in the prison. So this would include screening people while they're in prison to determine the best needs for their person, updated resource guides for those exiting the system. I met with Deputy Director Williams a couple of weeks ago to discuss a pilot program that I am willing for my agency to fund 100%, where we will be meeting with individuals who are expiring their sentences and connecting them to the resources, financial, that we can help them move into apartments or housing, as well as referrals in the system to not be discharged and dropped off at that Greyhound bus station, right? I'm kind of impatient. I can't wait for laws to be passed and for people to act. So I took the initiative to say, what do we need to do to start this pilot program? And I'm ready to start in February. So we've identified 2 locations, the women's prison, and I forget the name of the other one. And we're just in the process of doing the paperwork and, figuring out how much per inmate, how much per returning citizen and things like that. And then it was recommended that I reach out to Hope for Prisoners to make sure that the individuals to see what that looks like, to make sure the individuals that my agency will be working with are linked with the other reentry services in the community. So my hope is that from this pilot, we can gather some relevant stats and start pushing for more funding. So that was really quick because we've been here a long time. I can provide more information if you like at a later date. And I'm happy to answer any questions and partner to work on grants for returning citizen. Maybe you guys can give me a pardon, just kidding. But thank you again for allowing me to present to you today. And again, I think this is really, really important. And then it's really funny how the meeting kind of morphed into housing and recidivism at the end. And my presentation was pretty much on point with that. So that is all that I have for today.
Thank you, Director Grisby-Thetford. Do any of the commission members have any questions or comments about the presentation? Mr. Ponder?
Yes. And thank you so much for an incredibly thorough presentation. It got so good to one point, I wanted to get up and run around the room because everything that I think that you were saying was just 100% accurate. Thank you for the great work you do. Also want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to collaborate on anything that Hope for Prisoners do. Number one, we're all in. And then lastly, I just want to say congratulations on you turning your life around. And when you said that you're going to be a doctor soon, again, that was something that I was gonna get a run around the room because I love to see people with lived experiences, right, who have come through things. And, I consider you a fellow subject matter expert. So thank you very much. And anything that we can do, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Ms. Mull?
I'm just going to echo the same thing that John said. I just want to thank you for all the information you presented and just tell you congratulations again on going through the doctorate program. I've been unhoused several times throughout my life. And so I appreciate what you are doing and what your organization is doing. And it's so empowering to see someone that has lived through that to now be, soon to be a doctor in May. That's so exciting. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Schmidt?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Director Beth Schmidt. I've taken over for Chuck Calloway. And I just want to say to you, Katrina, I have run the largest homeless population here at Metro when I worked in community policing. And I am so proud of you. I too, like John, I want to run around the room. What you have accomplished, what you are doing is extraordinary. And I just, girl, I'm proud. I'm so proud of you for what you're doing and the information that you're bringing to us and the lived experience. And keep doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I echo their statements too. And, you've achieved a lot, if I might say, maybe in some ways, despite some of the systemic issues that we've discussed today regarding housing and treatment. to reduce recidivism or prevent recidivism. And hopefully we can learn from you. And as Mr. Ponder was saying, you know, you're a subject matter expert with lived experience. So we very much appreciate your presentation. And if there are no more comments or questions regarding this presentation, I'm going to close out number 8 and move to number 9, discussion of potential topics and dates for future meetings. The dates for the meetings for the rest of the year are provided in the agenda. We did, however, also discuss having a January meeting. So I'll ask Director Gonzalez how you plan to schedule that. Will you send out, do we want to do that now, or will you send out some dates after the meeting?
Thank you, Vice Chair Brady. I typically in schedule a meeting start with the chair and go off of her calendar and then just send it out to everybody else. Okay. So I will coordinate with her and let her know that now there's an additional meeting we need to schedule. And if she would like to send a poll, I may do that. And then once I have that out, I think what I will do is identify some dates with her and maybe send something out to the commission, because this discussion will be very important to get ready for the upcoming session. So I will survey everyone with the dates to get maybe a ranking of which ones work best for everybody, so we can make sure we have everybody. So that'll be my plan, is to coordinate with her first, and I'll get some dates to the rest of you, and we'll figure out which day works best in January.
Excellent, thank you. And then other than that, we have a date set for a meeting set for February 24th, 2023 at 9 a.m., March 31st, 2023 at 9 a.m., and April 21st, 2023 at 9 a.m. Do you anticipate, Director Gonzalez, that those will be virtual meetings or in person or hybrid?
Yes, they will be virtual meetings. Our virtual meetings will be until that meeting we have in August, because we use the legislative facilities, and since they will be using them, we will not be able to benefit from that. So yes, the meetings will be virtual until August. Okay,
thank you so much. So our staff is already working on more topics, and there's a lot, as we've seen, to discuss, and they will be open for items for you to have input on items for discussion and for future meetings. And if you have those, any ideas, please send them to Director Gonzalez, or we can open it up for a conversation now if anybody has any ideas for future meetings now. Ms. Moll.
I'm not sure if it's for future meeting or just discussion or questions. So I've been seeing on the news and reading, I think we all have, about the hunger strikes going on in the prison, or one of the prisons, and the concerns that some of the incarcerated individuals have and what's led to the hunger strike. And so my question is, I know during COVID that Mr. Ponder and I got to go and look at the situation when there were questions about what was happening with COVID. I really feel that with at least what I'm seeing and reading and hearing from people, that several of these individuals feel that they've been victimized in some way, or that they're being victimized in some way. And so I don't know if it's possible to either for us to go in and again, just kind of get a sense of what's going on, and maybe this time actually be able to ask questions, because last time we couldn't ask questions. We just kind of got to look around. Or at least, are there victim advocates being given to the individuals who are on the hunger strike, who feel like they're being victimized, so that they can speak with them? Because as victim advocates in the state of Nevada, we have confidentiality and certain aspects that protections that are given for those conversations, to get information from it, from individuals and able to work with that. So I'm just curious if, one, if what's being done that's, outside of just what the news is reporting. But also, I think it's important that as an entity, as a commission, that that's specifically made up of individuals and experts from across the spectrum of this field of criminal justice and research and things to that extent, that someone other than, no offense to the state, but someone other than just the state is looking at the situation in some kind of way, or at least able to go in and hear the concerns or learn from, I guess, both sides, what is happening. Just my concern as a victim advocate is I want to make sure that, no one's being harmed in any way. And it's not that I think that like the state is specifically harming anybody, but I do come from the background of my father was a corrections officer for 25 years. And so I understand that side, but I also have a brother who was arrested at 18 for murder. And the person that, the biggest trauma he had on the system was from guards, even though our dad was a guard. And so I just want to make sure that, we have someone, or there's some kind of accountability or some kind of metric for us or someone to be able to go in and look at that the same way we did with COVID, to just make sure that the complaints for COVID and the things people were feeling and saying, that we were able to go in and look and see for ourselves and come back and we're able to report to the committee, hey, this is what we saw, this is what we heard, this is how we feel about the situation, just to kind of get a better idea and better sense of ease for the general consensus or the general betterment of our individuals in our field right now, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I might turn that to any of the other commission members or Director Gonzalez to see the concerns that Ms. Mull expressed, how that relates to the work of the commission generally.
Yeah, I don't want to, I guess I am curious, like, I would say it would be at the pleasure of the commission, which is something we could explore if you want to, because I hear a couple things from Ms. Mull. I hear like maybe similar to requesting, it sounds like you want to see like what compared to when in COVID where Director Daniels provided tours for members of the commission. So I there's that. And then I think you're kind of requesting maybe an exploration of the issues, but might be a presentation, but I guess I want to see. I think technically the mandate of the commission is to study sentencing corrections policies and use data to do so. And so that's pretty broad. And so I think if there's an issue that the commission in general would like to explore, that's absolutely something we could figure out. I'm just looking at our agenda item to make sure where we're at. This agenda item does allow us to take action, the commission to take action as far as would you like to, I guess, figuring out there's an issue to explore or how to explore it. Staff would need some guidance. I did talk to Director Gitter to get some input about what this might look like. As far as seeing the facility, where this is happening is at Ely State Prison, which is our maximum security prison, which is more of the most dangerous individuals are. And so he does have concerns about security, but would absolutely be happy to try and figure out what that would look like. It would be very, very small groups. And he is concerned about security. I've toured that facility once myself. I don't know if you've been out there, and it's a lot. And when I think there were just two of us, and I think there were 3 or 4 people around us staff-wise to help navigate us through. And that's when the staffing situation was not what it is right now. And so in order to, that would be, so I can just let you know, I did touch base with him and I know he had to leave early. And so I can continue to work with him and see if the commission would like to explore this issue, how you would like us to proceed. So I appreciate Ms. Mull bringing that up, and then would definitely like invite, whether it's now or later, the input from the commission on what would you like us to look into? And then we'll continue working with the staff and DOC to figure out what would be the best way to get you the information and explore this issue to the satisfaction of what you're trying to learn about.
I would, thank you, Director. From a policy perspective, I would think that, and from, what we do as a commission, what we're tasked to do, the issue may be policy surrounding resources and things perhaps that the prison may need, sort of what we talked about today. Once people are released, what kind of housing is available, maybe around when we talk about the issue of reinvesting, maybe the issue of dollars saved, and then we make comments upon or policy recommendations on where resources ought to be reinvested, especially as it relates to the prison. That's off the top of my head where some of Ms. Mull's comments might relate to the work that we do. I don't know if anyone else has any. It looks like Mr. Hoffman, you have a comment.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to share Ms. Mull's concerns. I've also been concerned about what I've been reading in the news. I also think this is something that the commission should be looking at. I agree with what Ms. Jones-Brady just said about resource investment. I know that the last time we approved the reinvestment council's grants, some of that was for like data structures at NDOC. And that's great. And I still think that was a good idea. Maybe next time around it's dealing with I know that the prisoners have expressed issues where they're not getting as much food. The quality of the food is bad. That could be a place for reinvestment. I personally know there's a lot of issues with the way that medical things work, people not having timely access to medical care. That could be another thing that we could discuss. But just in general, I think we talk about sentencing and corrections policy as an abstraction. We talk about recidivism. We talk about, category A versus category B. What's the average length of time? But I think it's really easy to forget that these are real people in prison, and apparently that they're having enough problems that they're willing to risk their lives to draw attention to it. So I just think the point of a government in a democratic society is to look after the people. And I think that that's something this commission should be doing. So I also have kind of an actionable suggestion. I know there's a group called Return Strong, which is advocates for inmates, family members of inmates, that kind of thing. I'd like to suggest having them present at a future meeting. I think that could be a good way for us to gather information, maybe less logistically difficult than arranging trips out to the prison. So I would like to suggest that.
Thank you. Any other suggestions for future meetings? And I know that NDOC usually gives at least one presentation a year. So I don't know if they're on the schedule to give another presentation in the future.
We could, we coordinate with them presentations on demand, I guess, as needed, since we have the director on the commission. And so, I could reach out to them and I don't know, I don't mean to put them on the spot in case you want to say anything right now, Deputy Director, a comment about this, but you're welcome to. But I'd be happy to work with Deputy Director Williams and Director Gitter and work out presentations, or maybe a series of presentations that we could offer to the commission if you're interested, and set those up and get them on the calendar.
So just so that I'm clear in terms of the process, you're taking notes on what people are saying, and you're going to consult with Chair Stiglich and move forward accordingly with regard to future agenda items.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other comments or suggestions? Seeing none, I will close out item number 9, and I will now open the second period of public comment. Just as we did during the first period of public comment, those who wish to testify by telephone may do so. Due to time constraints, public comments will be limited to 2 minutes. Any member of the public that exceeds the 2-minute limit may submit additional testimony in writing to the Department of Sentencing Policy at sentencingpolicy@ndsp.nv.gov. So at this time, I will ask staff to manage and direct those who wish to testify. Mr. Sepulveda?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Members of the public who would like to testify by phone, press *9 or raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, please slowly state and spell your first and last name. And we currently don't have anyone, Chair.
Okay, with that, I close out agenda item 12 or 10, and the meeting is officially adjourned. Thanks everybody for your time, and everybody for the fabulous comments and reports, today's reports and information and data. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful holiday and New Year.